Hi. Today's share is L'zecher Nishma Sarah Rivka Bas Rav Nachum Umindel, Sarah Lamb Dratch, a wonderful woman who always had a smile and a joke. She was indeed someone who was always full of good spirit and life. Today we're learning Perek Samach Dal, Perek 64, a small and beautiful Perek full of fun wordplay, Mida Keneged Mida, and Hashem's open hand against an enemy. Let's start by reading the Perek. Lamanetzeach Mizmor David. Shema Elokim Koli V'Sifi. Listen, Hashem, to my voice in its trouble. Mipachad Oyev Titzor Chayoi. From the fear of an enemy, preserve my life. Tastireni Misod Mereim. Hide me from an assembly of evildoers. Me'rikshas Poale Oven. From a council of those who sin. Asher Shonanu Kacherev Lashonam. Who sharpen like a sword their tongues. Darchu Chitzam Davar Mar. To shoot their arrows. Davar Mar. Something that's bitter, implying perhaps that they dip their arrows into poison. Liros b'mistarim tam, to shoot secretively at the innocent. Pisam yoruhu v'lo yirau. Suddenly they shoot at him, and they do not fear. Yichasku lamo davara yisaper litmo mokshim. They strengthen themselves in this bad thing, and they speak about setting traps. Amru mi yireh lamo. They say, who will see? Yachbasu olos tamnu chefes bechupas. They search out pretexts and schemes completely of a kerev ish v'lev amok that are deep inside man in his heart. Vayorem Elokim chetz pisum. But Hashem suddenly shoots the arrow. Hoyu makosam, and their wounds are revealed. Vayachshiluhu alemo lashonam, and their tongues are a stumbling block to them. Yisnoddu kol ro'evam, and all who see them shake their heads. Vayira'u kol adam vayagidu poal Elokim u'ma'aseu hiskilu, and everyone will fear Hashem and speak of Hashem's deeds, and they'll understand His handiwork. Yismach tzaddik b'Hashem v'chasavo. Let the tzaddik rejoice in Hashem and take refuge in Him. Yishalu kol yisraelev, and all who are straight of heart will be not praise Hashem, but praise themselves that they have recognized it. The structure of the Perek is quite clear. Enemies have frightened the Baal HaMizmor, and he pleads with God to protect him. He details the plot that enemies have embarked upon, and before they could act, Hashem has come to the Baal HaMizmor's rescue. And this show of God's strength will cause good people everywhere to recognize Hashem and rejoice in Him. Now, the wordplay is frequent, and it's interesting. The three most obvious examples are the idea, first of all, of hiding. That first in Pasuk Gimel, the Baal HaMizmor asks Hashem to hide him away from what these enemies can do, and then in Pasuk Hey, they shoot secretively. Also, the same root word is used, but the most obvious example, or two examples, are Liros b'mistarim tam pisom yerohu, that they are shooting arrows, and they are doing it suddenly. And when Hashem exacts his revenge in Pasuk Ches, Hashem also is Vayorim Elokim chetz pisom. Hashem shoots the arrows suddenly at them. And through this wordplay, the idea of mida keneged mida, commensurate punishment, an eye for an eye, that in the same way that the enemies try to endanger the Baal HaMizmor, the psalmist, Hashem punishes them. They try to shoot arrows, Hashem did so to them. They try to do it suddenly, Hashem did so to them. Now, to what does this Perek refer? It could just be a general plea from generic enemies, or a general notion that when enemies try to attack, one should place one's hope in Hashem and He will do to them what they wish to do to you. But many Meforshim will look for an actual event to connect to this Perek, probably because the Psukim are so vivid. The best approach, L'Pshuto, is to connect it to David HaMelech's life. After all, he is the one who wrote it. Indeed, Malbim says that the enemy here is the infamous Doeg, head shepherd for Shaul, who was also responsible for the killing of the entire city of Nov, and who was one of the three people whom the Mishnah and Sanhedrin says does not inherit does not have a share in the world to come, in Olam Haba. Mam Loe says that this whole Perek refers to the incident Also, in David's life, when Shaul was in pursuit of David, and David snuck up to him in the middle of the night and stole his spear to show that he, David, did not mean any harm to the king. Both of these, again, are lipshuto and connected to David HaMelech, which on its own makes a lot of sense. However, it's hard to fit the wording of the Perek in with these events, which is why probably that others connect the Perek to future events prophetically. Rashi and the Midrash Shochar Tov say it does not refer to David, but refers to Daniel, who lived during the time between the first Beis HaMikdash and the second Beis HaMikdash. In particular, they hold that the Perek is referencing the famous incident when Daryavish threw Daniel into the lion's pit, and he was not harmed. That takes place in the 6th Perek of Sefer Daniel. Daryavish appointed Daniel one of his officers, and he was actually quite close to Daniel. But advisors of the king convinced him to write an edict that anyone who requests anything from any god or man other than from the king himself should be punished and should be thrown into the lion's den. Daryavish acquiesced, he wrote the edict, and then when the advisors caught Daniel davening to Hashem 3 times a day as he did always, they brought him to the king and said, look, your edict says that no one can request anything except from you, and he has violated it. We had to throw him into the lion's pit, and Daryavish had to agree, and he did so. And miraculously, the next day, he comes out alive and tells Daryavish that no harm befell him. Hashem must have been on his side. And Daryavish says that the advisors for trying to plot against Daniel, this man of God, deserve what he gave to them, and he threw them into the lion's pit. And they, of course, were not as fortunate, and they were killed. And here we see the idea of a midah keneged midah, that the very scheme that they tried to employ against Daniel was employed against them and was ultimately employed against them. And that fits nicely into this Perek, where they try to shoot their arrows suddenly at Daniel, sudden plot, and very suddenly, very quickly, everything turned on them. But now that we know that viewing this Perek as we can view it as referring to prophetically to a future event, perhaps another famous moment in Jewish history comes to mind, a time when the exact plot that the non-Jewish enemy wanted to employ against the Jews was later employed against him in a sudden fashion. And I'm indeed thinking of the story of Purim and Haman's plot against Mordechai, Esther, and the Jews. And indeed, Sforno says that our Perek does refer to that Haman tried to eradicate the Jews, and specifically in the way that he tried to eradicate them, or eradicate Mordechai with those gallows. On those he was hanged. Of course, there's one difference, and that is the final 2 psukim. And with these, we are perhaps reminded of our most recent holiday. The final 2 psukim say, if you'll recall, that all those who see this will rejoice, and they'll speak about the deed of Hashem and how wonderful Hashem is, and they'll take refuge in Him. Purim and the Megillah Esther famously hides Hashem's handiwork. Hashem is not mentioned. It is not so manifest. Hashem's hand is not so manifest that people jump up and say, oh, Hashem did this. We know this in hindsight, but it does not come through readily, easily, obviously, in the story. But here in this Perek, the last 2 psukim say, when we see this revenge taking place, we know it's Hashem's work. And that perhaps recalls the events of Pesach, where Hashem's hand of retribution was so obvious that Jews could even point to it and take pride and joy in it. Thank you.